Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which I am sad to say is not that I have to tell you, we're still wrapped in a pandemic. There are several billion people in countries that haven't seen a single shot yet, let alone getting toward vaccination. There's a lot to be unhappy about. There's a lot to mourn the losses we've had to lives and livelihoods, and so much more. But as you look around the world, as you look around your neighborhood, you'll note that people are working hard to spread well-being every day. Today's session is about happiness in a time of a pandemic. And I don't think it's inconsistent to have those two words in your head at the same time or in your heart. I'm Andy Revkin at the Earth Institute, Columbia University, where this program has run for a year now, literally a year, about 170 sessions, exploring pathways to sanity and progress, resilience, and a better climate and better public health. And today, again, marking that tomorrow is World Happiness Day, and that there's a new report out on happiness including from colleagues here at Columbia and from elsewhere, as you'll learn in a second. We're going to just dig in on this idea of what is happiness like? How can you maximize it in a time of stress and uncertainty like the one we're in? I was showing there a minute ago, in 2005, my first reporting on happiness was in 2005 when I met a team from Bhutan who had come to Canada, to Nova Scotia, to dig in on the concept of gross national happiness. And I was fascinated, of course, and I had already been thinking about well-being and how do you measure progress is the big question there. So, and then since then, there's been this whole, Bhutan actually sparked, I believe, in 2011 or 2012, a meeting at the UN that led to these World Happiness Reports, an assessment of well-being and trends in countries around the world. And one of the authors is here today, Lara Aknin, who runs the Helping and Happiness Lab at Simon Fraser University. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Are you happy that all the work is done? At least,
yeah, it's a relief. The last few weeks and months have been a big push, but it's a pleasure to see the report come out, and I hope it's well received and well read.
Well, we'll be talking about it today, and I guess the website is open for anyone. Well, what is the website again? It's happy. Oh, I've got it right there. Worldhappiness.report. Worldhappiness.report. So you can check out their findings. And what's interesting, of course, is that Finland seems to have come in first again. How many times has Finland been?
This is the fourth year in a row, I believe.
Fourth year in a row.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I did talk to someone who's got Finnish relatives this morning, and I mentioned this to her, and she said, I don't know, a lot of people we know there drink too much. And she was implying it's not as happy as it seems. But what are the metrics you use when you're gauging this?
Certainly. So the primary analyses that are often the focus of the World Happiness Report are people's life evaluations as captured on the Cantrell ladder, which is a scale. It's proposed to people as an imagined ladder in which you could envision your best possible life as a 10 on the scale and your worst possible life as a 0. And so people are asked to self-report where they fall on this scale. And I believe in Finland, it is in the high 7s typically.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And this has to do with your, I think some of the things that we'll talk about are connectedness to community.
Yes.
There's sort of like the personal level, and then there's access to healthcare and, income suiting your needs and the like. But so there's some subtle factors too that frame how people feel about their lives.
Certainly. The report in chapter 2 in particular does a very deep dive every year, and especially this year, into what are the makings of people's life evaluation reports. And this year, more than ever, there's a greater focus on emotions as well, because emotions have shown to be much more volatile, tend to be more malleable, and life satisfaction, as you can see in the report, has actually shown a surprising degree of resilience. And so chapter 2 of the report tries to dig into that. But on the question of Finland, just so you know, that in last year's report, there was a special annex or chapter written specifically on the Nordic countries. And so if you're keen, or perhaps your relatives and friends who are from there might take some special interest, a group of collaborators and authors from the Nordic countries themselves tried to consider and evaluate why that might be.
That reminds me way back, and I'm going to introduce Irene and Dan in a second. When I was doing that piece in 2005, one of the anomalies around the world was essentially that Latin America is happier than it should be. I think it was a team, it was either Michigan State or University of Michigan who dug in on relative sense of well-being. And literally they found that several Latin American countries were happier than you would think they should be given their income, blah, blah, blah. So are there other anomalies like that in the mix?
There typically are. I mean, I guess it depends. The World Happiness Report metric and reporting is interesting in that, we're examining what are the people's self-reported well-being reports, not looking at external predictors of what you might assume to lead to well-being. And so income is indeed often considered one of the, the top supports, if you will, for people's, it's one of the most highly correlated facets of people's own self-reported happiness. But as you acknowledge and note, a lot of the other factors come from really important facets beyond people's income. So for instance, strong and satisfactory social relationships captured in the Gallup poll as having someone to count on in times of need is a really critical predictor of people's well-being, as too is trust in one's government and social institutions and people's engagement in generous behavior.
That's great. Well, we're going to get into, how the pandemic relates to all this in a couple of minutes, but I'd like to go to, you're a psychologist, a psychology professor, right?
A social psychologist, yes.
So we have a social psychologist. We have a psychiatrist, Dan Siegel from U.C.L.A., the Mindsight Institute. And Dan, I first met you at the Garrison Institute here in the Hudson Valley a very long time ago, giving presentations on the mind. And a lot of us assume the mind is all in here. And you had this great way of conveying that when your mind is actually bigger than yourself. There's as you say, a we map, meaning how much of you is your consciousness and awareness of people around you, and your me map. And I find all that invaluable in thinking about how to use social media, for example, for better, can make a very big we map theoretically. So when you think about happiness, I'd love to hear in a second how that meshes with your work. And then Irene O'Garden is a poet and an essayist and an educator who's focused on getting kids out in nature, among other things, and doing poems like the poem for the sake in the voice of a tree and the like. And Irene's book, her most recent book of essays, the title of the book is "It's Good to Be Human."
Glad to be human. Yeah.
Glad to be human, which is glad, right? Yeah. Glad means happy, and yeah. I think a lot of us these days, driven by social media and having a hard time with each other, find it, there's a lot of negativity about humanness. A lot of my environmental friends think of us as the worst thing that ever happened to the planet. But so let's hear from Dan first and then from you, just to get a basic sort of fingerprint on when you think about happiness. Where do we go from here? So Dan, how are you doing?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. First of all, Irene and Lara, it's great to meet you. And this is so exciting to be, Andy, with the powerful work you're doing about sustain what are we really trying to sustain? And I have such a deep fondness both for poetry and for social psychology. So this is really an exciting moment to think about happiness. What I'll say is that this report, Lara, that you're presenting to us and the way you're summarizing some of it, Andy, the idea of connection being, whether it's in trusting the world around you or finding generous, ways that we're, giving to others and giving to nature, or the way we connect with each other in social networks, but also connected to nature as the fundamental space in which we're existing. All of those notions of connection are really, I think, at the heart for me as a psychiatrist working in the field of mental health, and seeing the more linear view of my own field in psychiatry, but how that's been passed on in a very, some people call it reductionistic, but linear, I think, is maybe a more polite way of saying it. That A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. And then you could say, even since the time of Hippocrates 2,500 years ago in modern medicine, we said the mind is just activity in your brain. And then William James, giving birth in a way to the field of modern psychology, said, yeah, that we know that's true. And mind was just equated with brain activity. And so, Andy, what you're referring to in terms of our first meeting at the Garrison Institute, where I'm still now on the board, was the notion that maybe that narrative that we've had for 2,500 years in modern medicine and 125 years in modern psychology is actually part of a much bigger story. That the human mind, the source of happiness, for example, is broader than your brain. It's fully embodied, so I'm here on a walking desk, and if anyone has trouble with it, I'll stop walking, but I'm walking all day long as I'm writing and talking and stuff. So it's fully embodied, but even more than just the body, it's extended beyond the skin to include our connections with other people and our connections within nature. So it's more like an intra-connectedness rather than thinking, oh, I'm here, you're there, so we're interconnected. That's from the point of view of the part. There is a we map, if you will, like you mentioned, Andy, of the whole. So I think when people start to experience this more integrated way of living, that is, I'm differentiated in my body, and so I have an internal self, but my self is also my relationships with people on the planet. Then when you can differentiate those and link them, we call that integrated. I think that's the source of happiness. And I think I've been to Finland quite a bit, and there is this deep connectedness that you feel both socially and with nature when you're there. I mean, when I think about not just teaching there, but hanging out with the people who were sponsoring me, it was incredibly social, and we did it in nature. We were out on a lake, or we were out in a forest, or we were having a picnic outside. Yeah. And there was this incredible appreciation. So I just want to underscore the happiness report for me is so exciting, because when you look at connection, and maybe this is what, I don't know which countries in South America was, but I'll give you one teeny little story. A relative of mine called, and he was really concerned. I said, what are you concerned about? He goes, my son spent, 4 months in a semester in Peru, and I think he's depressed. I said, what makes you think he's depressed? He goes, he's come back and he's gotten rid of all of his stuff. He's giving away all his stuff. Isn't that a sign of depression and suicide? I said, well, let me talk to him. So we got him on the phone. The three of us were on the phone. I said, what's going on? What's going on? He goes, I was just in Peru. I said, yeah. He goes, I've never seen people happier before in my life. They had no things, and yet they had each other, and they were so happy in their communities that when I came back here to the United States, people are so miserable, but we have so much stuff. I thought maybe my first step is to get rid of the stuff that's killing us and find happiness and connection. This is literally, this adolescent said this. So I said to his dad, you have nothing to worry about. Quite the opposite. You should be very proud of the discovery your son had of the true source of happiness is in connection. And then this relative says, but what's going to motivate him to get a job and make money? It was such an amazing thing. And that's, I think, the story of our larger culture. Yeah. Like, can we return to the connection that is the source of true well-being? Because the mind is both within our bodies, not just attaining stuff, because we have this endless feeling of inadequacy because there's a wrong story we've been told. We're actually the connections with people and with the planet.
There's some very powerful ideas in there. And they resonate with something. I just had a talk here a week ago with Kevin Roos, who's a technology reporter at the New York Times. He has a new book out called Future Proof. And he's a tech. He writes about Facebook and all this stuff. And he has 9 lessons for how to stay valuable as a human being in a world of artificial intelligence where all of our jobs are being taken away. And guess what? And this is a great segue to Irene. It's your humanity, your humanness, the things that machines can't do, rather than trying to make yourself more like a machine, really good at, Twitter, make yourself more like a human, focus on your inner human. And I thought that was super powerful because, we're in a world where I think we're constantly being torqued toward being more machine-like. Time for the next Zoom, time for the next Zoom, time for the next Zoom. So Irene, what does a poet think at this time?
Well, it's so wonderful to hear you all talk about all of this, especially just now, Dan, what you were saying, because one of the reasons I keep saying I'm glad to be human and why it's important to be glad to be human is that when we think we're part of this horrible species that is doing nothing but bad things, that makes us want to withdraw. Who would want to be in contact with members of that species? Who would want to acknowledge themselves as part of it? And it makes us withdraw. And of course, that's exactly what we don't need right now. And it's exactly what feeds unhappiness, is to feel isolated. I believe that gladness is the default setting of the universe, that's really what universal energy is. You look at a plant growing, you look at an animal playing, you look at this vibrant quality of gladness is what we are meant to do. So it's just about reaching inside of ourselves and finding it and reaching outward and embracing that in one another. And this has been such a curious year because it has taught us, yes, connection is very important, and yet isn't it interesting we've had so few physical connections with one another this year, but those that we've had, many of them have been outdoors. This is like some kind of a healing process at the same time as it is a process of disease as well. So anyway, I just think I'm thrilled to look at the happiness report and very happy to hear what you're saying about this larger mind, because I think you're right, it's all part of it. So that's one poetic thought.
And Irene, I have to allude back to what you said literally 1 year ago. It was Friday a year ago when I pulled together you and Chuck Nice and Jonathan Kruk, the storyteller, just to grapple with where we were. So that was March, the early days of the lockdown. And you described your vision that there's two possible outcomes here. We were talking about the Great Depression. That was when the market had crashed, and you talked about the Great Compassion.
Yeah.
Can you just give
sure,
a little
I'll just
reminder?
run that by you again. The idea, because I teach children about nature, the idea of the caterpillar, of course, came to me, which is consume, consume, consume. And then all of a sudden it's wrapped tightly in this structure in which it cannot move, which seemed very familiar to me as we went into lockdown. And I looked around and saw it looked like the financial system was liquefying, the educational system was liquefying, the social system was liquefying. And that made me think of the caterpillar, who actually liquefies in the chrysalis, something I didn't know until a couple of years ago. And so it goes completely liquid, but it develops these cells, which I just love, called imaginal cells. And those are the incipient butterfly eyes and butterfly wings and so forth. And when the caterpillar, what is left of the caterpillar, encounters these, the immune system kicks in and says, you are not me. I'm going to fight you. I'm going to fight you. And then eventually it accepts that. And then these things are able to develop. And once that chrysalis opens, there is this magnificent winged creature. And I do feel like we're in a transformation as human consciousness, that we're going to come out of this winged. And so I was reflecting on that this morning. One of the first evidences of it is this great compassion. We, within this last year, the planet has seen more compassion than ever in human history before, because there are more of us and there are more of us responding to the need in each of us. And when I think about where we were a year ago, where we are now, and what are the imaginal cells that are happening, and you look at the racial justice movement. You look at the development of empathy when we now look at headlines and go, that should not happen. We look at the change of administration, God bless, that is bringing more compassion to more people by trying to help them get the vaccines they need. We have vaccines. We have a kind of, I love this part too, that we have a kind of tolerance for one another in a way that we didn't have a year ago. You know, you could be on a Zoom and something is going crazy over here, or you don't get the tech right. And everybody's like, yeah, no, that's okay. I mean, we ran out of rescue dogs. That's how much compassion is going on. People are wanting to take these creatures in. So anyway, I just feel that we have grown so much within this last year as a human race, and I'm glad to be part of it.
And let's turn back to the report now. There was a in The Economist, they did a piece that came out just now on this. I want to just share it so people can have a look. Hold on a second. And they picked up on an important point, which of course is, you know, we don't live in a unitary society. Even if you're gauging the happiness of a country, it's not revealing the full sweep of variability. And this finding was interesting that The Economist picked up on, which is the old have become happy in the pandemic and the young more miserable. I can validate that with one data point in our house. My 23-year-old son, who came roaring out of college a semester early just before the pandemic, now is in complete paralysis career-wise, and he's part of a whole cluster of people around the world who are stuck. So I understand that, but could you just get into that a little bit, Lara?
Sure. So yeah, it is an interesting point, and it's certainly a departure from previous data. So before the pandemic, there had often been observed a pretty distinct U shape in happiness, such that people are quite happy in their early years, around the 40s or so, when people are feeling many stresses of their own personal life and sometimes taking care of elderly parents. There's a dip, and there are lots of pressures in that time point, but there tends to be a dip in life satisfaction in the middle of one's life, and then a strong return through one's aging years. One major change of the pandemic has been basically a transformation of this U-shape into now a linear slope, such that happiness for younger aged individuals, particularly below 30, seems to be much lower. And so it's demolished half of this U, if you will. And it seems to be kind of there seem to be multiple reasons driving this. One is that, you know, the well-being of older adults has remained. One of the main sources, or one predictor of well-being, is health problems and people's perceived self-reported health, and that has actually declined. Concerns about health have declined in older individuals of late, and so that seems to be one support for well-being in older age. And also, you know, anecdotally, but also we're seeing trends in the data whereby older individuals who were well connected before might be even more well connected now. You know, some of the barriers to online communication. Zoom, which was a very foreign concept to many of us a year ago. I remember downloading the program for the first time because I had been so comfortable with Skype. Now is something that never closes on my computer. And I think my parents who, you know, struggled with their first dozen Zoom calls now know how to open one without blinking an eye. You know, we've done Zoom birthdays and all these types of life celebrations and mornings together on Zoom. And so I think in many ways, although, as Irene mentioned, a lot of our in-person connections have had to take a turn or experience some distance, humans have been pretty resilient in finding new ways to connect. I've seen drive-by birthdays, and there have been many ingenious, I think, solutions and means for connection. But younger individuals who are often at this peak of exploration and wanting to explore and connect are really struggling, perhaps. They often have some of the most expansive social networks that have had to really clamp down during this time. And also work prospects are really grim. A lot of people have been laid off jobs, particularly those who are more junior and in more volatile work environments. And so prospects that were, perhaps more available before the pandemic has certainly seemed more uncertain. And I don't think youth are oblivious to that. And so I think social networks, while health may be less of a concern for the younger groups, I think the social connection and the employment projections and an awareness of what's going on are all kind of competing and compounding factors for the younger age groups.
And kids, younger kids too. I had this horrible feeling for toddlers who were right at that moment when they're supposed to be running around, hugging each other, or maybe fighting with each other, having to be sealed off. Boy.
That's very true. So a lot of the data that we pull on in the report are collected by Gallup, who's primarily surveying individuals 18 and older. And so we don't know too much about what is going on in the youngest age group. But I can speak anecdotally. I have two children who have gone through this pandemic through the ages of 2 and 5, and it's just been, it's been both heartbreaking and heartwarming to watch. The 2-year-old. At early stages in the pandemic, he would see people and go, "Oh no, people," and run away.
Right.
But as things have started to lighten up, especially over the summer, I remember when playgrounds opened where I am in Vancouver and taking my 5-year-old then, he was just so starved for play and connection. I remember he would see kids from across the park and he'd yell out, "Hi, my name is Emmett. I live over there. Let's make plans to meet here tomorrow." And I thought it was just him until I ended up at the coffee shop picking up my, a drink from a barista. And she asked, "How are you doing?" And I gave a 15-minute answer, not realizing I had been so starved for, human conversation and connection in person. And so I feel it.
That leads to Dan's realm. I was going to ask you, Dan, in the context of psychiatry, and there's a lot of data that there was a surge of suicide and too. What I don't know if you still have a practice in psychiatry, but what do you sense is happening on a day-to-day basis in people's minds? How does this affect them? That some of those issues that were raised there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's so powerful to be here with each of you. I mean, this notion, Lara, that you're talking about the connection and the gladness, Irene, you're referring to, where people can lose it. And Andy, when you point out the study, that it's really different in different people, I think we really need to acknowledge that. I mean, even if you just start economically, you have people of wealth actually gaining more wealth during this crisis, and the majority of us, without that wealth, are getting worse. So just starting there, it's a disparity, and you'll hear people who have means will say, well, now they're kind of in a year-long retreat and they feel guilty about it, but they feel kind of, at ease with what's going on. But then you talk to other people who are not having employment, or like your son, are ready to go and ready to get engaged, but they can't, or kids who are locked down at home. And even with those who are of means that are on the internet, who can connect that way, the majority of kids on the planet don't have the internet. So they're locked down and separated. So I think if, from the psychiatry question you're asking, if we just start with what we're kind of all talking about, which is connection is key for health. And that's connection to people and the planet, nature. If we start there, then we say, well, this pandemic, is one of several pandemics that are, going around the world. And another, pandemic is social injustice. And so people feel horrified, who are, let's say, people with white skin, but people of color have known this for hundreds of years, that in a white dominant society, you're not connected to the larger, world of respect and membership. So that second pandemic, the virus being the first, the second is also about connection, really. And
For sure.
A third pandemic is the misinformation, polarization that people experience. And even with the murders that happened in Atlanta, I guess it was just yesterday now, we see this polarization leading to racism, and unfortunately, the human species has this in-group, out-group neural process of, especially under threat, dehumanizing those deemed in the out-group. And that's what we're seeing more intensely. So that's a third pandemic. A fourth pandemic is environmental destruction, and so I just want to have us take a little pause and say that for, let's say, a kid growing in this area, and you are seeing more anxiety, more depression, more suicide in youth, as well as with adults. You see those things. In addition, you see substance abuse and suicide.
The
right?
opioid epidemic.
All this stuff. So in some ways, this fourth pandemic of environmental destruction, people realize in their bodies, their home, Earth, is in jeopardy, and so that makes you feel this Utsi feeling. And, Krishnamurti has a quote that I once saw a paraphrase of when I was teaching in Romania: the ability to adapt to a sick society is not a sign of mental health. So then you look at the name of this program we're on, Sustain What? My daughter's in environmental science, actually at the Earth Institute at Columbia.
Right.
Yay. So when I talk about sustainability, she goes, Dad, it's regenerative. You have to be regenerative, not sustainable. You don't want to sustain what we've got. So this is, if you say business as usual, we want to sustain it. No. And it's exactly what I think, Irene, you're talking about, is this movement that this crisis of these four pandemics, and let's just name a fifth pandemic, the illusion of the separate self, let's just call it a solo self. Modern society tells us, the mind is just in your brain, or the self is just in your body. And then it becomes, a category of self versus other, a concept, okay, I'm just in myself, or words like I and me are just in this body. So I think this is a moment where we can be glad to be human, because even though we're seeing devastating effects on mental health, which are affecting our physiological health too, because they're related totally, we have the opportunity to use consciousness, the human capacity for awareness and choice, to say, whoops, modern society made a mistake, that in fact this solo self may be the root cause in some ways of certainly the three pandemics, but even the viral pandemic, the way we deal with it. I was just in Texas on a medical mission with my wife, where our relatives are, and we were there when the governor shut down the precautions, and he just said, every person, it should be up to themselves, to decide their destiny, he says. And I'm thinking, this is exactly the opposite of connection. We are all intra-connected within the whole. And even the way the virus is being mishandled in the United States with the polarization in these different states, I mean, it was remarkable to actually be in Texas at that moment. Now, I love my relatives are in Texas, but I want to just say that the mental state that can make a statement, even from a public figure like a governor, everyone is determining their own destiny, is so confused, so misinformed, so misguided, because in fact, who we are is a part of an interconnected whole. And we need to act accordingly with gladness and joy, and happiness is fine. We can say, look, we're facing a crisis, but let's do it together. Let's actually use this as an opportunity to dissolve business as usual, actually think about a new path. Joanna Macy calls it a great turning. Let's turn our focus towards an embracing of the interconnected nature of reality from the point of view of the parts, the interconnected nature of the reality from the point of view of the whole. And then we may do great, and we may realize there is enough resource on this planet so that the 7 billion of us can actually take care of each other. It's really possible. It's not just idealistic thinking. I think it's practical idealism, if you will. There's a practice we can do. So anyway, I just think that the mental health challenges we're having are because the world is in a kind of state of what E.O. Wilson would call an illusion of separation, or Einstein would have called it a delusion. So that's a false perception or a false belief. Either way, you can look at where we're at as an opportunity to increase mental health. So I don't know if that addresses your question, Andy, about the psychiatric side of it, but it's a much bigger picture than just any individual is there, but the practice of what we can do, you can apply at an individual level for sure.
Well, maybe Governor Abbott could use some of that. I wanted to get back to the report itself. Lara, I keep wanting to say Lana. Laura.
I get that a lot.
I'm not quite sure why. No, at any rate, what were some of the other findings you thought were most interesting? I think people should know that tomorrow morning,
Yes.
U.S. Eastern time, there's a live briefing. I'll put the link up again in a minute. I had it there for a second.
Thank you. Yeah, at 11 a.m. Eastern.
Yeah. So what else comes to mind as things that either surprised you or reinforced some idea?
Well, the report is chock full of really interesting and very thoughtful analysis of what has happened this year. Chapter 1, I think, which is what you've got up there, is kind of an overview, a highlights reel, if you will. And so interested readers could probably peruse that and then dig deeper into the chapters that are most relevant and interesting to them. But if I can't, and I'm happy to speak to what I thought was very interesting and really stuck out for me in the report, but I just wanted to follow up on some of what was just said, because I think there are lots of gems there, and at least 2 points to make. One is that both chapters 3 and 4 in this year's report kind of consider what East Asia did differently and how they managed to both suppress the pandemic, but also either sustain or in some ways bolster their well-being. And I think some of the messages learned kind of center around, for me, this idea of trust being really critical. A lot of the population was willing to support and listen to the public health authorities. But also, I think specifically about what Dan was saying is this notion of individual liberty was not nearly as important as this collective good needed to kind of follow and get behind some of these, some of the messaging and the science relayed for how to handle the pandemic. And so I just wanted to mention that I think that kind of reinforces some of the broader notions about this we mindset that I think is really interesting and important. And also, I agree that, chapter 5, I believe that the report is the final number. There's a deep dive into the mental health consequences, focusing less so on life satisfaction and happiness and emotional reports, but more on depression and anxiety and self-reported stress, using international data, but especially some from the UK. And it does indeed track a sharp decline in early months. And then what is, by and large, a surprising rebound after the initial early months. But as Dan also mentioned, the pandemic has really shone a light on mental health and mental health care deficiencies and services. And I do hope that it really will help us kind of not just build back better, but maybe build forward better with this. I really like the idea of regeneration, not just sustainability. I think that's a really lovely thought. But the report more broadly, I think some of the most surprising insights for me are covered deeply in chapter 2 about the surprising resilience when it comes to life evaluations. I think early data, the pandemic has been very, very challenging for many people. And as we disaggregate the data, we can see that some people were hit really hard and other people, as already mentioned, managed to move through unscathed or even with some benefit. But when we look at these large scale data points of life evaluation, we seem to be seeing some notable resilience. There is some movement, but not nearly what we may have expected early on. And so that for me was a surprise. One thing that kind of, I've learned over the years, but it was amazing to see emerge in the report this year again, is the importance of trust and social connection, which is a theme we've all been chatting about, and how that manifests in various ways. And so we've talked about it, I've mentioned it in brief, but across nations, and perhaps this East Asian success story has something to do with this larger narrative of we versus me, but also considering what that might look like in the workplace. There's a chapter on worker well-being and how we maybe need to reimagine work and reconsider what brings well-being through work, especially since so many of us spend so much of our time and waking hours investing in work-related pursuits. And there's also a very interesting chapter on social connection and loneliness. What are the protective versus risk factors that helped promote and alleviate distress over the years? And so there's a final chapter by Richard Laird, who is one of the main editors of the report, who considers the idea that really we need to take a broader look at what is well-being, not just how long people live, but how well they live, and provides a new framework for considering that both through the pandemic and beyond. Oh, I see my lab website.
Yeah, I had to ask, what does a happiness lab do?
I could give you a brief mention. So a lot of the work we do in my lab kind of centers around this idea that we've touched on in brief, but I'm happy to dive in if you'd like to hear more. Again, comes back to this we concept, is that one of the main predictors of human happiness, not just in North America, but around the globe, is what we can do for other people. And so my lab for the past decade or so has been studying the ways in which engaging in kind or generous behavior not necessarily increases the recipient's well-being, which we had seen before in the literature, but how helping others can actually make us happier. And so we've studied this in rich and poor countries around the world, with toddlers under the age of 2, in ex-offenders, in gang-involved youth, and just trying to, we've argued in the past, and in fact, 2 years ago, I believe I wrote a chapter for the World Happiness Report, which is how I originally got involved, making the case that this might be a human universal.
That's pretty, well, that gets back to what Irene was saying. I think that I love that idea that the default setting of the universe is gladness, and that peeling away the impediments to it can reveal it and maximize it. I'm going to show one other little snippet that gets at the resilience part. Irene, I'd love to hear some more thoughts from you. Emily Raboteau, who's a writer in the city, had posted the other day, check out the piñata for our kids' socially distanced outdoor birthday. And the piñata, of course, is SARS-CoV-2. And then here was the socially distanced destruction of the piñata. So this, people find a way, right? They find a way to make the best of a tough situation. Irene, you work with kids. I'm sure you were constrained from having field trips or getting kids down to the river.
Absolutely, and Zooming them. I did a few things outdoors in like 20-degree weather, which was good. It gets everybody, speak of resilience, it gets everybody out there and breathing and realizing that this doesn't, cold does not kill you if you are, eventually able to get back into the warmth. Right. But actually, the first thing that popped into my head, and then I actually do have a little thing that I can read.
I was hoping.
It's just about things that are broken and what we can do. But so I will find that before. Well, no, I won't find it first. First, I will say, well, as I listen to you, Lara and Dan, I go, so now we have these ideas of what causes or what allows or fosters happiness in people. So of course I was thinking of that crushing the slow of happiness that you were talking about with young people. And it just made me go, could we kind of reverse engineer happiness? I mean, if kids don't have they don't have a job to look forward to, could there be groups that they could be connecting with? They could do the things that are not financial that foster happiness. And I don't know how you reach groups of people in that way, but I think this is really precious information. And if they knew there was something other than what we've all been taught is the road to happiness, which is the job and the this and that, right, that it might empower them in a way. So that was just one thought. And what I want to read is a piece from my book called Broken Just So. I'm going to show you a picture of the vase that is referred to. Oops, can you see it? There it is.
Yeah.
Broken just so. Sad events have happened recently, not so much to me directly, but in the lives of people close to me. Business disappointments, unexpected hospitalizations, and the untimely passing of a young mother here in our community darkened many hearts. What do we make of such pains, such losses? A treasured vase came to mind. It belonged to my mother and is an object whose graceful fanning fluted form I have ever loved. Earlier this year, it broke. It did not shatter, but it will never hold water and a live bouquet again. Yet I couldn't bring myself to throw it out. I kept it in my studio with the broken places turned from view. This morning, I was inspired to take a little action and refrain from cursing the darkness, so to speak. Because it had broken just so, I could thread a small bulb on a simple fixture precisely through break. Oops. There it is. Had the break not been just so, this lovely lamp would not exist. But neither would it exist had the break never happened. Let us hope that in those times life breaks our hearts. They break just so, to let our light shine forth.
Beautiful. The cup is already broken. I remember that from some Buddhist readings I've done.
Yeah.
It's a path to acceptance, if not maybe immediate happiness. That whole well-being question is so interesting to me. I wanted to ask Lara before I turn to Dan again. When I did that piece in 2005, the Census Bureau in the United States was starting to see if they could do a well-being index. And someone who was involved with it, I have to read my own story to recall who, said Congress was not happy about that they want GDP, and there are these impediments to the idea of normalizing measuring things like access to healthcare, community cohesion, because they cut against the status quo. So are we, how much of that do you see, and in that interface between these reports over the years and people who might shift practices?
I think I think there has been an improvement over time. Some countries seem to be more forward-looking with this. For instance, the UK has some incredible data tracking well-being within citizens over time, and which has been extremely helpful in trying to understand what makes, what are the predictors of happiness. But I think it's part of a larger enterprise. I think it's representative of where the science is now. I think a couple decades ago, people may have been hesitant because they may have been uncertain that the science was sturdy enough to kind of stand behind these assessments of life evaluations or momentary emotions at a level with which we could put that much gravity behind tracking this as a national indicator. But I think the evidence is clear now that this is a subjective state that is meaningful to people and predictive of important outcomes. And so understanding where it lies and tracking it over time is responsive to major life events and who is doing well and who is struggling is a really important consideration. And also, I think what we measure signals what we care about. And so simply tracking GDP suggests that is the ultimate end of what our society is pursuing. And I think that is short-sighted and misaligned with where the human condition can lie. And so I think one key finding to emerge from the literature over the past several decades is that income is not a perfect predictor of well-being, and there are many other things that are more or meaningfully correlated and predictors of. And so I think we need to look beyond GDP as the ultimate indicator of success, start asking people how happy they are with their lives and tracking that to help people achieve this ultimate end that many people feel is much more worthwhile and worthy.
Because Chuck Nice was supposed to be here today, and he's on the road to Atlantic City, and I haven't heard from him, so I'm hoping he's okay. I assume so. But Chuck is a comedian who has dived heart and soul into making society better and working on climate as a comedian in a way that's unique. He also focused a lot this past year on Black Lives Matter. He does every year. So I want to play a little clip from last year's session 1 year ago, just to get his voice and thoughts into the mix here. Hold on one second. This should work. Here he was reacting to Irene talking about the great compassion, and to Jonathan Kruk, a storyteller, tell a great story. But
no, I just love hearing what you guys saying. I mean, it's as a comedian, we tend to be observers, but we also tend to be a bit more cynical, where we should be skeptical. Cynicism tends to take root where healthy skepticism should be. And that's just an occupational hazard. But hearing you guys talk, I have to say, inspires me. So that's a great
Yeah.
thing. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great thing. And it's exactly what you're talking about. I think also too, we have been using the connection of electronic meetings, social media, screens as a means of averting our gaze to another human being.
Hey, this is good. You got to make a little fun out of that rap.
So I think we've been hiding. So behind that. Now, here's what's happening right now, and it's, you know, we're in week 1 of this.
Yeah.
And you're already seeing people with the need to get on the screen, not as a means of escape, not as a means of disconnection, not as a means of, I don't want to be around another person, let me do, but as a means of like, hey man, I need to talk to somebody. Hey man, I actually do need you. I actually do need you. And so maybe what will happen after that is that realization of the need may translate into a greater physical connection with one another when this is over. Maybe. I don't know.
I think so.
Pretty amazing. Oh, that's so funny. Guess what? Here he is. Chuck,
Hey.
I just literally finished playing the clip of you from 1 year ago.
Oh, really?
Just now, literally as you popped into the green room.
Oh my.
Has gotten much better. It hasn't suffered because of the pandemic. I hate looking at myself. So,
Well, it's great for us to see you, and
it's great to
have
see
you
you.
here. Thank you for popping.
I'm delighted. I'm delighted to be here a year later, and you know, just to see the smile on Irene's face right now lets me know that this year has not been as bad as it may have been perceived by my own brain.
So you must be happy that you're heading to a gig today. Is this true still or not?
I am. It is true. It is
An
fantastic.
actual gig in a room with.
I will be at the Claridge Casino Hotel tonight. There will be a socially distanced show. You can only sit with whomever you attend. So, you know, if you come with 6 people, you get a 6-person pod and they sit you there. And then 6 feet away, there's another table of whoever came together. It's a little less than half the capacity of the room. So I feel comfortable about doing the show. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. I'm just huge on the precautions that we should take to make sure that we don't exacerbate this problem, which we already have, as far as I'm concerned. I call this the pandemic of 2020-21, because it should have only been 2020, but we're such idiots, we extended it to 2021.
Special.
But I feel really comfortable about it. The room setup is going to be as safe as we can make it. Of course, it's a casino, and here's the great thing about casinos: they have excellent circulatory filtering systems.
They want to keep you oxygenated.
Yeah, well, they pump in oxygen because they want to keep you awake to lose your money. And on top of that, they have incredible smoke eaters all over the place because they can't stop. They really don't want people smoking, but they have areas where people can smoke. But much like the pandemic, we know that you can't smoke in a section of a room. If you are smoking in the far corner, you are smoking in the far corner, the opposite far corner. So, you know, and it's funny, but so they have these great, filtering systems that, you know, when you put it all together with the mask, the social distance, the filtering systems, I'm feeling really confident about it. I've been doing shows in New York. They have been illegal outdoor shows. Because everything has been shut down in New York. So you're not allowed to have comedy shows, but they've been doing shows outside, on rooftops, in gardens, socially distanced, and you have to wear a mask. And people like the whole idea of checking temperatures and the whole thing. But there's for audiences of like 8 and 10 people. Because even though the show is illegal, you still can't say like, okay, we're gonna have 100 people come in and have this comedy show. So it's been like 8 and 10 people, and I've been doing those miserable shows because I'm an addict. I got to get on stage. I'm just totally addicted.
Yeah. So when you were on a year ago, the clip that I literally just played, was we had just entered lockdown, and it was like the second show I did of this thing, and you were talking about the need to be on screen, changing the potential for that to change us to be more connected, more empathetic. And I don't know how that's played out since.
I have to say that I had an experience that really changed me during the pandemic. I was very fortunate to book a new television show, and it shot in Los Angeles.
Right.
And I had to go to Los Angeles, but I had to be quarantined for the entire time because as the host of the show, it's not that they really cared about me. It's just that if I got COVID, the production would shut down. So they were like, hey man, we're sorry, but you can't really have contact with anyone. And I spent 2 months in isolation. And that really, first of all, I found out what being lonely is, and loneliness is a wanting desire for connection, but no connection can be found. And I think it's also when you desire human contact that is like a real, contact. So in the room with somebody or touching somebody or, just being a real contact of some sort. And I have to say, I have the greatest appreciation for seeing people in person, more than I have ever had in my entire life. I get on the subway now, if I have to, and I honestly look around at the people and I'm just like, I just feel like going, hello. How are you? I hope your day is well. I would hug you right now, but that's probably dangerous and a little creepy, but hey, human being, what's up? So that's kind of where I am right now.
I felt when I went to get my first shot a week or 2 weeks ago at Javits Center. It was the first time I came into New York City in a year from up in the Hudson Valley where I live in the Highlands, kind of where we had this ability to walk out still into the woods and stuff. And I was kind of nervous, and it was the strangest feeling walking across town for the first time toward Javits Center from Midtown. And I had that similar feeling, but when I got in there, the happiness and gratitude that I felt getting that shot was immeasurable. And seeing, everybody coming together.
Yeah, it's very powerful. And I'm just, I'm hoping I was just walking in New York City last Saturday. And I'm sorry I'm talking so much. I don't want to monopolize everybody's time here.
No, we had a good dose already earlier of everybody.
Okay, good. But I was walking Saturday and I was in the Flatiron District, and it was so weird to see people as they were walking because it was a kind of a warm day and there was a lot of people in the street, relatively speaking, because the streets are still a ghost town. And people were looking, in New York, people are like, it's like head down, keep it moving. Yes, gotta go. Get to my place. And it's like, it's like you ride through the streets, and it's like a million power walkers in suits and like, that's what New York looks like. And people were walking and looking at each other. Like they were looking at each other, making eye contact. Sometimes people were like, hey, as they cross the street, somebody's in your, oh, hey, hi. And I was just like, where am I, Minnesota? What the hell is happening here? And it was really cool. I hope that lasts. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That shared sense of, experience, that unfortunately often comes and is born out of tragedy, where we know that we've been through something together, even though we may have endured it separately. We now share this experience, and even from a distance, we are brought closer by having gone through this. And that's what it felt like. And the only other time I ever felt that was after 9/11, where you were walking through the streets and people were like, hey, hey man, we're here. We're still here. Oh my God, aren't we grateful that we're here? Like, that type of feeling is what I was experiencing the other Saturday when I was walking through the Flatiron District. And it was very cool. I hope it lasts.
We all do. And so Lara, who is very busy today because the happiness report is out today, essentially in The Economist, and there's a briefing tomorrow online, has to leave. And it was great to have you here and to talk about the findings and your insights in this I think the world would be a lesser place if this report was not out there. So I'm really glad that you're all working on it. And
thank you so much for having. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to say thank you. It was a pleasure meeting all of you and chatting. And this was a lovely way to spend the hour. I wish I didn't have to run, but I really do appreciate it.
Hang in there and have a happy weekend. But don't you guys go anywhere. Lara, again, thank you. I wanted to get a final round of thoughts from you before we go, if you can hang on a little longer.
Sure.
So Dan, there's been a lot spoken. What resonates most for you, especially thinking, practical advice. Let's focus on steps people can take that can maximize the we in the context of well-being.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Chuck, it's great to meet you. Just so happy you could join us, and really well timed, Andy, to show the clip before Chuck got on.
It was ridiculously fortunate.
That was great. That's so good. This question of practicality, I think, is exactly what was on my mind. And I wanted to ask all of us a question, Irene, Chuck, Andy, and if Laura were here, Laura as well. What do we do to take this crisis, this shift in the way things have been, where people are coming to realize we deeply need not only one another, but we need nature. We need connection, just to put that word from Lara's happiness report just straight out there, that connection is compassion. Connection is this way that we feel that we belong. Connection has to do with our identity, where we're more than just a private self as a me. The me is important. We want to sleep well and feed the body and exercise the body and really enjoy the body. So that's a me, and you probably heard me said this before, but, can we move to a MWE, MWE identity, where we say, I don't have to give up the individual bodily aspect of experience, that I have a history of my ancestors, of this particular body. I have a history of my relationship with my parents. I have a history of just being in this body. So I need to take care of the body well. And at the same time, my skull nor my skin are boundaries that limit my identity. And I can have this, wider angle view. So just like I can take a lens and look at my thumb, I can also let my eyes focus on the whole space around me. Can we help people go from this close-up identity of just a me that often happens when we're threatened, which larger culture has been doing, to actually hold on to the sense of needing each other, of connection? In the southern part of Africa, they have a phrase, Ubuntu, I am because you are, and you are because I am. And even expanding that notion that's in all indigenous teachings, really, that we're a part of nature, not just people. So I just wonder how, just like Irene, your beautiful analogy of the metamorphosis of the caterpillar into the butterfly, if we look at complex systems, they do go through a period of organization. They can get rigid or chaotic, but then they can go through periods of reorganization and disorganization to emerge in a new state of organization. How do we dissolve the caterpillar of business as usual, of the GDP, of the profit, you know, in that sense, to actually realize the profit is in our connections. The profit is in the greater good. What can we actually do on a practical level to make that sense of connection become our new way of flying like the butterfly? You know, I have some ideas. I'm actually working on a book literally as we speak, due in a few days, to try to articulate this. But what do we do as a larger culture to have that intra-connection be the new way of living? You know, what thoughts do you three have about that? What can we practically take away to make that feeling, Chuck, you're talking about, of instead of, you know, I'm a power walker ignoring connection, to realizing, wow, I can have gratitude for connection and realize how we contribute to the greater good is also the good for the interior as well as the relational. It's something that is a win-win-win situation, but we just haven't thought that way in modern culture.
Irene, I want to give you kind of a closing thought here too with Chuck. But I have an idea. Actually, I've got a couple ideas, but
We'll say.
I'll throw one, and it's pretty practical. And there's a company that could, in a heartbeat, make it happen. So when we think about apps, you think about all the apps are very micro, like managing your time, whatever. But Google Maps, for example, tells you where you are in the world. Now, there's a little time slider thing on Google Earth that tells you a little bit about where that place that you're in was, but you have to look for it. So I've had this thought, and it relates to how I now present my thanks for the people who tended the land I live on before we were here, the Lenape. And I think this is a picture of Columbia University. It doesn't seem like that, but there's the two campuses. The main campuses are the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory and Columbia, you're in the city. And of course, that's all. If you go to nativeland.ca, native-land.ca, it's essentially a Google Maps for history. And these are the Native American names for these same places. And when you peel away the modern labels, it gives you your presence and the absence at the same time. And I think, you know, why couldn't you just have Google Maps that just has that as a layer? So what's that little button? Oh, it's the previous map. What was here before? And there's a website called radio.garden that has all the world's digital radio stations on a Google map, like a big globe that's rotating. And you can listen live to radio anywhere in the world. And I think it's a short step to have that be voices. And so communities can connect and learn. So I think technology can help us if companies don't just focus always on maximizing views and the like, and think about, you know, true utility. So that's my idea.
Beautiful.
Irene, over to you.
I love it. Well, Chuck, I'm so glad you made it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm so glad you are out there making people laugh and making people think. And, you know, the only solution I see is for people to do these things that are so critical to themselves, because those are those larger impulses that come through us that do connect us with one another. Because if we're not doing the things that are powerful in our own consciousness to do, then we are not going to be able to connect in the same powerful way that we enjoy when we allow ourselves to be who we are. So I think there are infinite ways for us to explore that, but we have to start with paying attention to whatever the impulse is within us. So yeah, get outdoors. Yeah, connect with kids. Yeah, all of that. I certainly know that within our community, the connection with the essential workers, the people behind the grocery, we're like so grateful to that. The guy who has kept us going, the UPS driver. There is a kind of, it's almost a Christmas feeling of connection with one another, that gratitude that we have available now. And I just think that the momentum of that is going to continue, because we are so far from the end of this. We are, you know, I know we all thought it was going to be, oh, it would just be a couple of weeks, we'll be in lockdown. It's like, here we are. No, this is the great change. And we have to pay attention to the little winged cells inside of ourselves and the little butterfly eyes inside of ourselves, and release them for us to be able to do that as a whole, because otherwise we'll just get like, oh no, how do we all do everything? I think we can, but I think we do it by responding to that energy within ourselves that connects us to each other.
Beautiful. So Chuck, before you hit the road, I hope you have a great show.
Thanks.
Any last thoughts? And then I'm going to play some music. There's a song that comes to mind. We can see.
Yeah, well, thanks, Andy and Dan and Irene. Thank you so much. I wish I would have had more time. It's a crazy day for me, but you're right. I'm about to, get off of this and go jump right in the car and make my way all the way down to the hotel and do the sound check and all that good stuff. And I'm super excited. This will be the first show that I've done indoors in March 13th was my last one. 2020 was my last indoor real show on a stage with a audience and the whole deal. So I'm super excited. With respect to the beautiful sentiments that you all three have just put forward, I think that there's a connecting thread through all of that, and I call it mindful immersion. And it's like, I love being a part of someone else's culture because I had the great fortune as a young person to be exposed to many different cultures. And so I know my own culture, but at the same time, I appreciate my culture more because I have been to a Diwali celebration. I have been to many seders. I've sat Shiva with, a man who was like my second father. I have been and prayed in a mosque, and all of these things, I think I was the winner. Even though when I was doing them, I felt as though like, am I not a magnanimous person? Look how great I am that I go and grace the presence of this mosque with my presence, So, the idea is that when you do that, what you find is that you are the winner. You take away something that's greater than yourself. And, I think that that's one of the most fulfilling things that I have experienced in my life is, being at one of my best friends, Carlos, being with his family during a salsa party that they're having, and just drinking it in, being a part of it. And the cool thing is that, all those things are connections. I don't realize it then, but that's what I realize now. And I'm the one who's enriched for it. And I think that, it goes back to what Dan is saying. Yet when, to get outside of this cocoon, that we create for ourselves, honestly, you're the person who wins. Sometimes you feel like you're protecting yourself when you go within, but the truth is that your protection comes from getting outside of yourself, because you're protecting so much more. You're protecting your sanity, you're protecting your integrity, you're protecting your humanity. So, these are all the things that I really I dig now. So I appreciate it. And I love the great change. I love it. I think, the idea of the butterfly and caterpillar, the idea of this being, the time of the chrysalis, that being that goes into that chrysalis becomes a soup. Really just devolves into a molecular nothing goo. And then reforms. It is a miracle, man. It's amazing. So yeah, I'm all about it.
Well, this has been an absolutely wonderful session. I'm really glad that I could bring together people who give me happiness every time I'm with them. Chuck Nice, have a great show. Irene O'Garden, be well. Let's meet up at a distance, and even closer when we're all vaccinated. Hope everyone out there can get vaccinated. It's still a very uneven landscape. And Dan Siegel, UCLA and the Mindsight Institute. Really great to be with you again. You asked some great questions there. The practical questions, I think, are the important ones. What can we do tomorrow to build more cohesion and community, and the path to well-being? I am going to play one of my favorite musicians when I was a youngin' was Donovan, and he wrote a song called "Happiness Runs in a Circular Motion. Thought is like a little boat upon the sea." So hold on to see if this works. There's a really great little sort of a old clip. Hopefully this will work.
It goes like this. The girl's part has got some words. And it's happiness runs. This is how it goes. Happiness runs, happiness runs. Happiness runs, happiness runs. Happiness runs, happiness runs. Try it, girls. Happiness runs, happiness runs. Don't be shy. Happiness runs, happiness runs. Happiness runs, happiness runs. Happiness runs, happiness runs. Oh. Happiness runs. Keep going. Happiness runs, happiness runs. Slowly. Happiness runs, happiness. Now the men.
La 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 la.
Happiness runs in a circular motion. Thought is like a little boat upon the sea. Everybody is a part of everything anyway. You can have everything if you let yourself sing.
Wow.
Pretty great, huh?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well,
I
you're all
love-
amazing too. So thanks for being part of this again,
Absolutely.
and come back anytime.
Thanks
Super
for having
cool.
us. What a happy making conversation.
Great.
Thank you, Chuck and Irene. Thank you, Andy, for having us. And
Happiness, happiness runs in a circular motion. Thought it's like a little boat upon the sea. And that's a show. Take care, everybody.
All right, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.